The first gun clicked before anyone screamed. The street market went silent. Plastic bags frozen midair. A child's laughter cut short, vendors stiff as statues. Men in black flooded the narrow road, boots crushing spilled oranges, rifles raised with casual certainty. "You," the gang boss said, pointing at the black woman behind the food cart. "You were warned." She didn't run. She didn't beg. Her hands trembled, but she stayed standing as two men grabbed her arms, dragging her away from the cart she'd built with 10 years of sweat. "Please," she whispered. "I have nowhere else." The boss turned his back, already bored. "Take her." Then a cane struck the pavement. Slow. Deliberate. Everyone turned. An elderly black woman stepped forward, shoulders straight, eyes sharp despite her age. She planted herself between the guns and her granddaughter. "You still limp when it rains," she said calmly. The gang boss froze. His smile vanished. His breath hitched. He turned, slowly, staring at the woman like he'd seen a ghost crawl out of the past. The street held its breath, because the most feared man in the district was trembling. And then, without warning, he dropped to his knees. If you want stories where power bows to truth, subscribe now. This is only the beginning. Act 1. The Sweep. Morning came late to the street. The sun had already climbed over the buildings, but the narrow market alley was still wrapped in shadow, the kind that clung to damp concrete and whispered of things best left alone. Vendors were setting up like they always did, out of habit, out of necessity, out of stubborn hope. Folding tables scraped against the ground. Plastic tarps snapped open. The smell of frying oil, ripe mangoes, and strong coffee layered the air. Aisha adjusted the scarf around her head and checked the burner under her food cart. The flame flickered blue, steady. Good. She wiped her hands on her apron and glanced down the street, the same way she did every morning. Nothing yet. "Don't worry so much," her grandmother said, settling onto a small stool beside the cart. Ruth moved slowly these days, but her eyes missed very little. If trouble is coming, worrying won't stop it. Aisha smiled weakly. "You say that every day." "And I'm right every day," Ruth replied, tapping her cane against the pavement once satisfied. Customers began to arrive. A construction worker ordered 2 wraps. A schoolgirl paid with coins counted twice. Life moved in small, familiar transactions. For a moment, Aisha let herself breathe. Then the sound came. Engines. Not 1 or 2, many. Low-controlled. Expensive. The kind that didn't belong in a place like this. Conversation thinned. A vendor at the corner stopped mid-sentence. Someone quietly pulled their cart closer to the wall. No one had to ask what it meant. Everyone knew. The sweep. Black vehicles rolled in from both ends of the street, sealing it off with surgical precision. Doors opened in unison. Men stepped out wearing dark jackets despite the heat, their movements practiced, unhurried. Guns stayed visible, not pointed yet, just enough to be understood. Aisha's stomach dropped. "Stay behind me," Ruth said softly, rising with effort. A man with a shaved head barked orders. "Clear the street." "No. You've been warned." Crates were abandoned. Food spilled. A woman cried out as her table overturned. No one argued. No one ever won arguments here. Aisha gripped the edge of her cart. "We paid," she said, voice shaking. "Every week. We were told." The man laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Prices change." 2 enforcers moved toward her. Ruth stepped forward immediately, cane planted, back straight. "My granddaughter is working," she said. "You will speak to her with respect." The men hesitated, not out of kindness but surprise. The street boss arrived then. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. He walked down the center of the road as if it belonged to him, hands loose at his sides, eyes cold and observant. People lowered their heads as he passed. Some crossed themselves. Some backed away like prey, recognizing a predator too late. "Boss," the shaved head man said, nodding. The boss's gaze settled on Aisha. He studied her cart, her face, her hands, calculating, dismissive. "You were warned," he said calmly. "We paid," Aisha repeated, her voice barely holding together. "I have receipts." "Take her," he said, already turning away. The order landed heavy. Hands seized Aisha's arms. She cried out, instinctively reaching back toward the cart, toward her grandmother. "Please," she shouted. "Please." This is all we have. Ruth moved faster than anyone expected. The cane struck the ground. The sound cut through the chaos, not loud but commanding. Final. The boss stopped. Fully he turned back. Ruth stepped between the guns and her granddaughter, her frame small but unyielding. She looked up at the man who ruled this street with violence and fear, and did not flinch. You still limp when it rains, she said evenly. Left leg. From the winter you slept behind the fish market. The boss stared at her. Something in his face shifted. A crack in stone. His breath caught, sharp and audible. The men holding Aisha loosened their grip, uncertain. Ruth took one more step forward. You used to cry quietly, she continued, because you didn't want the others to hear. The street went dead silent. The boss's jaw tightened. His eyes, once empty, flickered with something old and dangerous. Lower your weapons, he said hoarsely. No one moved. He turned, rage flashing. Yow. Guns dropped. And then, to the horror of everyone watching, the most feared man on that street took one step forward, and sank to his knees in the dirt. Cue the debt. The street didn't move. No engines. No voices. No phones lifted to record. It was as if the entire block had agreed, instinctively, that whatever was happening was not meant to be interrupted. The boss remained on his knees. Dust clung to the knees of his tailored trousers. His hands rested on his thighs, fingers curled tight, knuckles pale. He didn't look up at first. He couldn't. Ruth watched him carefully. Not with fear. Not with triumph. With recognition. You shouldn't kneel in the street, she said gently. Your mother would scold you for that. His head snapped up. You. His voice cracked, raw and unguarded. He swallowed hard. You shouldn't know that. Ruth tilted her head, studying him the way one studies a grown child who still carries old wounds. She hated dirty clothes, Ruth continued. Said people judge you before you ever open your mouth. A long breath shuddered out of him. Somewhere behind them, Aisha felt her legs weaken. One of the enforcers reached out automatically to steady her, then froze, unsure whether he was allowed to touch her anymore. The boss rose slowly, not fully, just enough to meet Ruth's eyes. Close, the years fell away. The scars. The reputation. The blood. I looked for you, he said quietly. After. Ruth's grip tightened on her cane. I know. You disappeared, he went on, words tumbling out now, uncontrolled. The building was gone. The church said you moved. The market vendors didn't remember your name. I thought, he stopped, jaw working. I thought you were dead. Ruth exhaled, a long, tired sound. Life doesn't end just because you lose someone, son. It just gets heavier. The word son landed harder than any blow. The boss dropped back down to his knees, this time deliberately. Fully. His forehead bowed toward the ground. Men who had killed without blinking turned away, uncomfortable witnesses to something far more intimate than violence. Aisha stared at her grandmother. Nana, she whispered. Ruth glanced back at her, eyes softening. It's all right, baby. I'll explain. She turned back to the man kneeling before her. Los Angeles, she said. 1996. Behind the fish market on 4th. The street dissolved. The winter had been cruel that year. Wet cold that sank into bones and stayed. Ruth remembered the boy because he never asked for food. He just stood there, trying not to shiver, pretending he belonged to the shadows. She'd seen that look before. Children who learned early that needing something was dangerous. She'd brought him soup in a cracked bowl and pretended it was extra. Watched him eat like it might vanish if he slowed down. You don't have to stay out here, she told him. He'd shrugged. It's fine. It never was. She'd hidden him in the church basement during the nights the older boys came around. Cleaned the blood from his knuckles when he fought back. Taught him how to wrap his hands properly. Most nights he cried silently, face turned to the wall. What's your name? She'd asked once. He hesitated. Does it matter? Yes, she said. Names matter. He told her. She'd said it carefully, the way you say something precious. Back on the street, the boss lifted his head. You made me promise, he said. You said if I survived, I had to survive right. Not angry. Not small. Ruth nodded. You promised. I broke it, he said, voice hollow. Ruth's gaze sharpened. Did you? He gestured weakly around them. Look at me. She followed the motion, guns, fear, silence, and then looked back at him. I see a man who stayed alive when the world tried to erase him. That's not nothing. But I hurt people. So did hunger, she replied. So did fear. So did the ones who left you there. You don't get to pretend you were born cruel. The words settled over him, heavy and unavoidable. Ruth reached out and placed her hand on his head. He flinched just slightly, then leaned into it. I fed you, she said quietly. Because someone fed me once. That's how it's supposed to work. Aisha felt tears spill down her cheeks unchecked. The boss straightened. He turned to his men. From today, he said, voice steady again but changed, this street is protected. Every vendor, every cart, anyone who touches them answers to me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. He looked back at Ruth. And her, he added, is untouchable. Ruth sighed. You always were dramatic. For the first time something like a smile tugged at his mouth. But listen to me, she said, tapping her cane once. Protection isn't ownership. You don't get to replace one fear with another. He bowed his head. Yes, ma'am. The words were quiet, but they carried. Act 3, the line that cannot be crossed. The protection lasted 3 days. 3 quiet mornings. 3 evenings where vendors set up without flinching at every engine sound. Word spread fast, too fast. Protection always does. And where there is protection, there are those who take it as a challenge. The message came just before dawn. A runner found the boss while he sat at a small table in the back room of a shuttered bar, Ruth's chipped teacup resting beside his phone. He hadn't returned it yet. He didn't know how. Boss, the runner said, breathless. They hit the east corner. The boss didn't ask who they were. He stood. By the time he reached the street, the smell told him everything. Burnt oil. Charred metal. Smoke curling into the pale morning sky. Aisha's cart lay on its side. The tarp was shredded. Pots overturned. Food scattered and blackened where fire had kissed it too long. A thin line of blood streaked the pavement. Not much, but enough. Aisha knelt beside the wreckage, shaking hands, hovering uselessly over what had once been her livelihood. Ruth stood behind her, cane planted, spine straight. They came at night, Ruth said calmly. 4 of them. Told her protection ends when you sleep. The boss's jaw tightened. Did they touch you? He asked Aisha. She shook her head. They wanted you to see it. He closed his eyes once. That was a mistake on their part. He turned to his men. Lock the street down. Quietly. They moved instantly. Phones buzzed. Doors closed. Engines started, not loud, not fast. Purposeful. Ruth watched him closely. Violence invites more violence, she said. Yes, he replied. But silence invites erasure. He knelt beside Aisha, surprising her. I will rebuild this cart. Better than before. She looked at him, eyes red. That's not what I'm afraid of. I know, he said softly. You're afraid this was a message. He stood. And messages deserve replies. The rival crew didn't expect him to come himself. They never did. The warehouse was lit by flickering fluorescents, the air thick with dust and cheap liquor. The men inside were laughing. Too relaxed, too certain of their immunity. The laughter died when the doors opened. No warning shots. No speeches. Just precision. The boss moved through them like a memory they couldn't outrun. Every strike measured. Every order obeyed without question. Guns stayed holstered unless needed. This wasn't rage. It was correction. The leader was dragged forward last, bloodied but alive. Street protection isn't yours to give, the man spat. You don't own people. The boss crouched to eye level. Exactly. He gestured. A phone was placed in the man's trembling hands. On the screen, live footage of the market street. Vendors standing together. Ruth seated calmly on her stool. Aisha beside her, holding a cup of tea someone had pressed into her hands. See that woman? The boss said quietly. She fed me when I was nothing. That makes her more powerful than you'll ever be. He leaned closer. You will apologize. Publicly. Or this ends differently. The man swallowed. To who? The boss smiled, thin and dangerous. Everyone. By noon the apology was done. No grand speech. No excuses. Just a man on his knees in the street, voice shaking, admitting fault. promising never to return, promising respect. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. Ruth watched from her stool, expression unreadable. When it was over, she rose slowly and walked up to the boss. "You didn't have to spill blood," she said. "I didn't," he replied. "I spilled certainty." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good." He exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders for the first time in years. The new cart arrived that evening. Stronger frame. Better burners. A small sign hand-painted by a neighboring vendor hung from the front. "Welcome back." Aisha smiled through tears. The boss lingered, uncertain. Ruth tapped her cane. "You can sit," she said. "You look tired." He sat. For a moment they watched the street together. Alive, loud, unbroken. "You know," Ruth said, "kneeling once doesn't make you good." "I know," he replied. "It just makes you accountable." "Yes, ma'am." She smiled faintly. "That'll do for today." And for the first time the boss believed tomorrow could be different. For what remains, the street learned how to breathe again. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But slowly, like someone relearning how to trust their lungs after long illness. Vendors returned in cautious waves. New carts appeared beside old ones. Laughter came back in fragments, tentative at first, then louder as days passed without consequence. Protection held. And that, more than violence, unsettled the city. The boss reduced his presence. Fewer men. No visible guns. Orders delivered quietly through channels that didn't bruise the air. The street didn't become his territory, it became off-limits. That distinction mattered. Aisha noticed it before anyone else. He came every morning now. Always alone. Always early. He sat at the small table Ruth favored, the chipped teacup still in his hand. He never ordered. He waited. "You don't have to keep coming," Aisha said one morning, handing her grandmother a bowl. "I know," he replied. "I want to." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "Wanting and needing are different things." "Yes, ma'am." She studied him, then gestured to the chair. "Sit properly. You're slouching." He obeyed without hesitation. The men who once followed him with unquestioning loyalty watched from a distance, confused. They had been trained to recognize strength in commands, not patience. In fear, not restraint. This version of their boss didn't fit the legend. That worried them. The warning came quietly. A message passed through intermediaries, then intermediaries of intermediaries. A coalition was forming. Rivals who had tolerated the boss out of convenience now smelled weakness. "You've gone soft," the message said. "Streets are watching." The boss read it twice. Then folded it neatly and set it beneath Ruth's teacup. "They think kindness is surrender," he said. Ruth sipped her tea. "People who confuse those two usually die angry." He nodded. "They'll come. They always do." He hesitated. "When they do, I won't let them near you." Ruth fixed him with a look sharp enough to cut glass. "You don't get to decide that." Silence settled between them. "I didn't survive this long," she continued evenly, "by hiding behind stronger men. I survived by knowing when to stand still." He lowered his head. "Yes, ma'am." The attempt came a week later. Not guns. Not fire. Paper. Health inspectors. Permits questioned. Fines issued. Stalls marked for removal. Clean, bloodless erasure. The kind that left no bodies but plenty of empty spaces. Aisha stared at the notice taped to her cart, hands shaking. "They can't do this. We followed the rules." Ruth read the paper carefully, then smiled. "Oh," she said. "They've decided to be clever." She picked up her phone. The call she made didn't go to the boss. It went to the city council office. Her voice, calm and precise, carried decades of meetings, churches, schools, and neighborhoods stitched together by persistence. By noon, inspectors returned, this time apologetic. Permits were corrected. Fines dismissed. The street remained. The boss watched from across the road, something loosening in his chest. "You didn't need me," he said later. Ruth nodded. That was the point. That evening he gathered his men. Not in a warehouse. Not behind closed doors. On the street. "This area is no longer under our protection," he announced. Murmurs rippled. Because protection implies control. "From today on, this street governs itself." Someone protested. Boss, that makes us look weak. He met the man's eyes. If fear is the only thing holding your power together, then it deserves to fall. Some left that night. Others stayed. Those who stayed learned something new. Months passed. The boss changed how he operated, not cleaner, not softer, but narrower. More precise. Violence became a last resort, not a language. His empire shrank but hardened. What remained was loyal, disciplined, intentional. And Ruth remained where she always had been. On her stool. Came by her side. Watching. One evening as the sun dipped low and the street glowed gold, the boss stood. I have to go, he said. Ruth nodded. You always do. He hesitated. I don't know if I'll come back. She reached out, took his hand, weathered fingers wrapping around scarred knuckles. You don't owe me your life, she said softly. You already paid your debt by becoming someone worth saving. His throat tightened. He bowed, not low, not publicly. Just enough. As he walked away, Aisha watched him disappear into the crowd. Do you think he'll be okay? She asked. Ruth smiled, eyes following the same path. He will be, she said. Because now he knows where he came from. The street buzzed around them. Alive, imperfect, free. And that was enough. Act 5. The name that lasts. The street didn't notice when the boss left. That was how he knew he'd done it right. No sudden silence. No heads snapping up in fear. No rumors trailing behind him like smoke. The market hummed the way it always had. Vendors calling out prices, metal clanging, music bleeding from a cracked speaker somewhere down the block. Life uninterrupted. He watched from the far end for a moment, hands in his pockets, then turned away. The city didn't forgive. It never did. But it adjusted. New alliances formed. Old enemies stayed cautious. His name still carried weight, but it no longer arrived before him like a threat. It followed instead, quieter, reshaped. Weeks passed. Ruth's health wavered with the weather. Some days she stood tall, voice sharp. Other days she slept through the morning rush, breath shallow but steady. Aisha learned to read the signs without panic. Tea first. Silence when needed. Stories when asked. One afternoon, Ruth motioned Aisha closer. You remember the boy I told you about? She asked. Aisha nodded. The one from the fish market. That wasn't the first, Ruth said softly. Or the last. Aisha looked at her, surprised. Kindness doesn't come with receipts, Ruth continued. You never know which one will echo. That evening the boss returned. No entourage. No warning. He looked thinner. Older. Lighter. Ruth smiled when she saw him. You're late. He chuckled quietly. Traffic. They sat together as the sun dipped low. I did what you said, he told her. I stepped back. And, she asked. And the world didn't end. She nodded, satisfied. It rarely does. He hesitated, then reached into his jacket. He placed a folded document on the table between them. What's this? Aisha asked. A transfer, he replied. Ownership. Not to me. Never to me. Ruth frowned. Explain. The buildings bordering this street, he said. They're no longer tied to my operations. They belong to a trust. Run by the vendors. Legally. Silence fell. Aisha's mouth opened, then closed again. You didn't have to. I know, he said. I wanted to. Ruth studied the paper, then slid it back toward him. You don't buy redemption. I'm not, he replied. I'm stepping out of the way. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. All right. Relief washed over his face, not triumph. Relief. The night air cooled. Lights flickered on. Someone laughed nearby. You know, Ruth said casually, you never did tell me what you call yourself now. He blinked. What do you mean? Names change, she said. Titles too. I'm curious. He thought for a moment. I suppose, nothing official. She smiled. Good. Aisha laughed softly. That might be the best answer. Later, as the street quieted, Ruth's breathing grew shallow. Aisha noticed immediately. Nana. I'm fine, Ruth said. Just tired. The boss stood. I'll get help. Ruth caught his sleeve. No. He froze. This moment, she said gently. It's mine. They sat with her as the street slept. Ruth spoke quietly then, about summers long gone, about her own grandmother, about soup shared with strangers who never came back, about the way life moved forward whether you were ready or not. When her voice finally stilled, Aisha knew before the tears came. The boss bowed his head, not to the street, not to memory. To her. The funeral filled the block. Not with fear but with people. Vendors closed their carts. Neighbors brought flowers. Children held hands they usually didn't. Stories passed freely, about meals shared, words spoken at the right time, doors opened when none were supposed to be. The boss stood at the edge, anonymous, unannounced. No one chased him away. No one bowed either. That felt right. Months later, a small plaque appeared at the corner of the street. No title. No dates. Just words. This place stands because someone once chose kindness. Aisha touched it every morning before opening her cart. Somewhere else in the city, the man who had once ruled by fear walked quietly through crowds, unseen, unafraid. Power had left his hands. Something better had taken its place. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like a woman with a cane standing her ground. Sometimes it sounds like a name remembered when the world has moved on. And sometimes real strength is knowing when to step out of the way. This wasn't a story about gangs or streets or fear. It was a story about what lasts. About kindness that echoes across decades, about debts that can't be paid with money, and about how the quietest people often shape the loudest futures. If this story moved you, stay with us. Subscribe to Melanin in Seoul for more stories where culture, memory, and power collide, where Black lives in Korea are seen, respected, and centered, and where strength looks different than you were taught. Like the video if this story touched you. Comment where you're watching from, and tell us what part stayed with you the longest. Until next time, remember, the name that lasts is the one spoken with respect.